What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the CFP Eliminator series, where we take a look at the national picture of college football and really seeing what teams still have a realistic chance of making the college football playoff, as well as whose dreams got dashed over the course of week number one. And with this being our first full week, we had a lot of changes happen in the CFP Eliminator. First and foremost, we got to go ahead and get started with the teams that got eliminated. Were not, so we won't waste too much time. But before I dive into it, before I show the entire graphic, let me make sure. I need you guys to do a couple of things for me. Hit that like button, and then also, if you happen to be brand new to the channel as well, you love the content and you love seeing those Saturday streams that we have for college football Red Zone, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well, so we can connect. You can connect with other diehard fans such as yourself. So, with that being said, with that caveat taken out of the way real fast, let's go ahead and take a real good look at the national picture in terms of the CFP Eliminator. And we saw a substantial number of teams that did end up getting eliminated from the CFP contention. Matter of fact, it was a grand total of 10 teams that we did see witness that absolute downfall. And it was a little bit more than anticipated, because we did have a couple of teams that actually sustained losses from the FCS ranks. So dishonorable mentions, particularly to Army in mid-Tennessee. Army losing to Tarleton State at home, and that was a double overtime affair that this did end up happening. And then you also have mid-Tennessee State not only losing to Austin Peay at home to begin their season, but what happened to them as well is that they got blown out by Austin Peay. So safe to say that for the Blue Raiders, it could be a long fall season for the Mid-Tennessee State squad this fall. Did see a fair number of other teams, some that are a little bit more surprising than others. So, for example, Boise State. Boise State had that game against USF, not only losing on the road against Southern Florida, but they got blown out, 34-7 being that final score. And that's a pretty big black eye for a Boise State team that's trying to prove that it is more of an ascendente. Was very stunned by that final result. So Boise State is out. Charlotte, they lost big in the Duke's Mayo Classic to Appalachian State, 34-11. And it's a game that Appalachian State needed to win, because Appalachian State did have those signature wins. Not only do they get one to begin their season, they also won in dominating fashion. San Jose, another surprise as well. Thought we would be seeing Central Michigan here instead, but San Jose gets upset last night, 16-14 being your final score. And so the Spartans, they just couldn't get out of their own way. Central Michigan, they get a good win on the road in non-conference play, but the Spartans are effectively out. UMass hosted Temple to begin their season, and Temple blew them out 42-10, so UMass is eliminated. UTEP loses a competitive game against Utah State. The Raging Cajuns, they lost the food. They certainly lost the food. The Rice Owls pulled the upset off, so they lost that one as well. And then Eastern Michigan did end up getting blown out by Texas State. 27-52, I think, was that final score. So Eastern Michigan is done. And then Georgia Southern went and played Fresno State. Fresno State coming off of a loss to Kansas, where it was a somewhat non-competitive game for the Fresno State Bulldogs in week 0. Well, they bounced back and they beat Georgia Southern, which eliminates the Eagles of Georgia Southern from CFP consideration. Not only that, we do see a lot more action in terms of teams that do need to win out, because these teams did end up losing to power conference teams, mind you, but they weren't particularly close power conference games. So what we ended up seeing is Buffalo, Miami, Western Michigan, Nevada, Marshall, New Mexico, UTSA, Old Dominion, Georgia State, Southern Miss, Florida Atlantic, Ball State, Coastal Carolina, Oregon State, Hawaii, and Colorado State. What all those teams have in common is not only do they lose to power conference opponents, but it was not necessarily super close games. So not eliminated by any means, but now no longer any room for error. These are teams that are going to have to win out moving forward in order to be have a legitimate shot at the CFP moving forward. And then, of course, in terms of what we have for the at-large section, a few other G5s included here: Ohio, Eastern Carolina, Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State, and Toledo. The reason they're up here and why they're not in the must-win-out period column is because of the fact that, hey, they did lose, but they played really competitive games, right? Ohio went on the road, played against Rutgers, and even though Ohio was a free possession underdog, Ohio only loses by a field goal. And then a lot of the same stuff could be said about Eastern Carolina, only losing by a touchdown against North Carolina State. Jacksonville State, those guys, they went into the bounce house heavy underdog, very big underdog, matter of fact. I believe it was a 21-point underdog at kickoff. They lose by a touchdown that UCF had to score in the final quarter just to avoid overtime. Kennesaw State, they lost by 1 point. They lost by 1 point to Wake Forest, and I know Wake Forest probably won't be too impressive, but Kennesaw State might be better as well than anticipated, at least on the defensive side of the ball. And then Toledo played a really competitive game against Kentucky. So if those teams do win out, I think they should be teams that not only could get the G5 spot, but in the rare occasion where there's a chance for a second G5 to get in, if those 5 teams were to somehow win out, that does mean that, hey, you're probably looking at maybe those teams being in consideration for an at-large, even from the ranks of the G5. So that's what we had, kind of recapping what happened over the course of this past weekend. We did end up seeing 10 teams eliminated. Like I said, we had 4 teams eliminated coming into this league. So coming in, we are sitting at 132 teams. That number is now reduced to 122. So 10 teams eliminated. And I think we are going to see at least probably about another dozen teams being eliminated. While they won't be previewed over the context of this video specifically, because we are going to see, because there's so many to cover, and I don't want this video to become too terribly long, just make sure you tune into the channel over the course of the week. But to give you an idea of what's happening, so 10 games happening over the course of this week, this upcoming weekend in week number 2, that we do consider as CFP eliminators. Liberty going on the road to take on Jacksonville State. How do the Gamecocks look after putting up quite a feisty fight against UCF? Both teams are opening up against into Conference USA play. That is going to be a noon kickoff on CBS Sports Network. And then you have several free 30 games that are going to be kicking off that will be included in the CFP Redzone stream as well. Fresno State taking on Oregon State after the Beavers were blown out by Cal 34-15. Fresno, they lost to Kansas earlier this season, but they did respond nicely, beating Georgia Southern in what we previewed last week on the channel, and that will be previewed later this week as well. We have the I-35 rivalry game between Texas State and UTSA. UTSA historically with the advantage with a 5-1 lead, but Texas State looking to win this rivalry game for the second consecutive time, which would be the first time in the rivalry game history where Texas State wins multiple games in a row since this rivalry game was established, I believe, back in 2012. Then we got UAV in Nevada, both teams opening up American Conference play. Both teams playing against FCS squads, but Navy looking a lot more comfortable than what UAB did over the course of this past weekend. North Texas coming off of a big win against Lamar. They're taking on Western Michigan, who's coming off of a loss against Michigan State. That's a non-conference matchup. That's going to round out the free 30 games that are going to be considered as CFP eliminators. Then we have 3 games happening at 7, starting with Western Kentucky taking on Toledo. Toledo, like we mentioned earlier, playing a very competitive game against the Kentucky Wildcats. Well, it seems like Western Kentucky is rolling early. We saw them win very convincingly against Sam Houston to knock out the Bearcats back in week number 0. and then responding by putting together a really strong effort against North Alabama, an FCS team, covering with comfort as well. So it should be a very competitive game that we see in the Glass Bowl. Memphis taking on Georgia State. Memphis doing what they should have done against Chattanooga, while Georgia State was completely decimated by Ole Miss. They have a lot to respond to. TJ Finley just committed to Georgia State. Didn't know that's something you could do in the middle of the season, but did see that on Twitter today. So we'll see if TJ Finley can do anything to help this Georgia State team out, or if Memphis can roll. Tulane, we could see Tulane ranked in the top 25. The Redshirt Sports top 25 has not been released as of the recording of this video, but if it were up to me, I think Tulane is a top 25 team. Looked really good against Northwestern. They're going to go travel and play South Alabama in the Sun Belt. South Alabama putting together a solid performance. That's going to be a 7 o'clock game. And then two other games that are going to be happening outside the college football red zone stream. Tulsa taking on New Mexico State. That's happening at 9 p.m. Eastern. Which should be a fair measuring stick game between the bottom of Conference USA and in the bottom of the American. Picked Tulsa to finish last in the American, while New Mexico State, I believe I had them picked either 8th or 9th, I think, for Conference USA. Or either that, or they were like 10 for 11. I think this year there were 12 teams, but yeah, I think New Mexico State, that would be a good measuring stick game. And then how about San Diego State at 10:15 Eastern taking on Washington State? Cougars just coming off of a scare against Idaho. Nearly see them pull off the upset. Pulled on them last week, but Washington State does end up handling business and finding a way to win, while San Diego State could sneak up some people in the Mountain West. I think we've seen so far in the first 10 days of the regular season that the Aztecs could be set up nicely. San Jose State doesn't look as good as anticipated, and UNLV and Boise State, they have their own set of problems. So really, it opened things up for San Diego State. Maybe they could make some more noise than anticipated. We'll see how they stack up against Washington State when they kick that game off at 10:15. But in the meantime, that is all the games that we have for week number 2. Let me know what you think down in the comments section in terms of where things stand with the CFP Eliminator. This is your host, Jake of College Football Red Zone, and we'll be tuning in throughout the week to cover every critical game happening around the national college football landscape.